and another topic in the muscular system. It's basically focusing on movement, okay? But we're going to review origin and insertion. So they're included in the title, although primarily we're talking about movement in this lesson. So let's get started. So the origin, remember, that's the immovable attachment point of a muscle. And then the insertion is the attachment point of a muscle that is movable, okay? So you need an origin and an insertion in order for there to be movement with muscles. If both attachment points were on the same bone, when the muscle contracted, there would be no movement. So the first term we're going to talk about is abduction. So I remember it, ab makes a big angle. So in your hand, abduction. Okay, when you have your arm on the side here, raise it up, abduction, make a big angle. So it goes away from the midline, but I just remember it, abduction makes a big angle, okay? Adduction is the opposite. It's the opposite. It goes toward the midline, okay? So abduction, raising your arm up like this, adduction, bringing it back down. Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction. Big angle, back. Big angle, abduction, back, adduction. Extension. It's movement that increases the angle between two parts. So I could do it like this. That's extension with your neck, but you could do it with your hand. So if I have my hand like this, this is extending the finger. So the same thing that you see happening with the knee. Flexion, okay, is decreasing the angle. So bending my head down. So I have my hand like this, flexing those finger joints, flexing one single finger joint. Okay. And here you can see there's lateral flexion that you can do with your neck joint, which may not be possible with all the joints that have flexion. You can see there's knee flexion. There's hyperextension. So that means moving beyond anatomical position. So technically this is hyperextension, because this is flexion. Extension would be bringing it back. Hyperextension, going beyond anatomical position. But we often don't get as specific when we're talking about the motion. This is still extension. It's just a specific type of extension. So think about your arm in anatomical position and wrist flexion and extension. So here's your wrist. There can be both, right? What is wrist flexion and extension? So I just demonstrated both of those. Okay, which one is which? Flexion is going to decrease the angle. Extension is going to increase the angle. So which part of your arm would have muscles that contract to produce flexion? So here's flexion. So where are those muscles contracting? If you do it, you can feel them. So where are they? They're on the anterior side. They're right here. And you could feel it if you do the flexion. So what part of your arm would have muscles that contract to produce extension? So the extensors are going to be on the posterior side. Let me just scoot this so you can see. The extensors are going to be over here. And if you do this extension motion, you can feel it over here. So look at this image. What is this? So doing this. Do you know? Wrist extension. So what muscle is being stretched? Okay, is it the flexors or the extensors? Well, what's being stretched is the flexors. That's this muscle right here, okay? They're being forced to elongate, and you can feel the stretch in them. The extensors are actually shortening, right? So they're contracting. These muscles on this side are the ones being stretched. So elevation, it's motion upward in a superior direction. So this. Okay, that's with your scapula. Elevation. Depression is moving downward, so shoulders down. Also, it's possible with your mandible, so depression. Elevation. Depression. Elevation. Elevation. Depression. Elevation. Depression. Pronation. Okay, so this involves your forearm. Okay, and has to do with the rotation of the ulna. So there are two locations. So standing in anatomical position, imagine bringing your forearm up. It's like this. This is not pronation. Pronation is like this. Okay, so the palm is going to be facing down. Okay, I always remember the opposite one. So the opposite one is supination. Okay, so that would be as your hand is in anatomical position if I just lifted it up. Why do I remember it like this? Palm up. Supination. You see, literally, you see the word up in there. Also, you could remember, I would like some soup, please. Supination, pronation, supination, pronation, supination, pronation, supination, pronation. Rotation. So that's when a body rotates on its axis. Okay. But we can be more specific with our rotation when we're not talking about the neck. We can talk about medial rotation, where the body part is moving toward the midline. So with my shoulder, rotating it like this. Okay. You can do that with your hip. You can see lateral versus medial rotating toward the midline. That's medial rotation toward the midline. And then lateral rotation would be away from the midline. So doing your shoulder outward. Circumduction is moving around, typically a ball and socket joint, although I could be doing this, which could be circumduction of the neck, but I could do windmills with my arm. Circumduction, I can do that with my leg. So forming a circle, circumduction. Opposition. I don't know why. This is one of my favorite terms. So opposition is this. Moving your thumb and a finger to touch the pads to each other. Opposition. Okay? Opposition. This. Moving your thumb or finger to touch the pads. And then reposition, putting it back into anatomical position. So opposition, reposition, opposition, reposition, opposition, reposition, opposition, reposition, opposition, reposition, opposition, reposition. Okay? Dorsiflexion. So you can see right here is taking your ankle and pulling it back. So think about, remember the back of you is the dorsal area. So pulling your ankle so that it points toward your dorsal area. Easier one to remember though is plantar flexion. So if you remember plantar flexion, you should remember the opposite. Plantar flexion is pointing your toes. So you can see that motion of your foot pointing your toes downward. So dorsiflexion is the opposite. Pulling your ankle up so that your toes point toward your back, toward your dorsal region. Plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. All right, so you're going to use this information in an activity in class, but I'm going to make a more specific video going through all of the movements, which is going to help you. So this is a general overview, but there's going to be a more specific video coming. And there you have it. Origin, insertion, which was just a teeny tiny review, and then we focus on movement. Now, mind you, these are not all the movements, but these are the ones I'm having you focus on. All right, hope you learned something.